Hey, I'm Sage Plays. Welcome back to the Alpine Mountain Zoo, where autumn has arrived. I love how the zoo looks now with all these new trees, and today, as well as changing the seasons, we're going to be starting another new area, a Paleolithic land of ancient animals called the Lost Wilds. This is where we left the zoo last week, and the Lost Wilds is going to improve and expand upon our temporary Wisent habitat to create an environment lost to time. Let's go! This new area was not in my plans for this zoo, but sometimes inspiration just hits you when you're building and you just kind of have to listen to it. When I sat down to make this episode, basically what I was going to do to begin with was just replace this fence here for the temporary Wisent habitat with a much nicer looking custom fence to complete this paddock, and then we would go and build something else. But when I was thinking of what other animals we could have in this area, I thought the GEFORCE's horse would be nice here. With these two huge paddocks, we could have two rare animals that are being reintroduced across Eurasia. But then looking at the GEFORCE's horse and the Wisent together, it just brought to mind a Paleolithic landscape, the kind of landscape that the early humans would have seen 50,000 years ago. Because at the same time that the Wisent was roaming across Europe and GEFORCE's horse was roaming across Asia, another very similar breed of horse was wandering around Europe alongside the Wisent. In fact, in those amazing cave paintings you see in Lascaux and places like that, the horses that you see in those old cave paintings look very similar to GEFORCE's horses. They tend to have tan coats and dark manes. I thought it'd be amazing to try and bring that ancient European landscape to life. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on the Wisent habitat and bringing in GEFORCE's horse into the paddock that you can see next to the Wisent here, with no visible fences separating them from the landscape. We're going to be using a technique in this build called the borrowed landscape, which is kind of similar to the predator and prey effect that we had at Belmont Zoo. We're going to use ditches around the side of the habitat, so there is no visual barrier between the end of these habitats and the beautiful vista of trees and mountains that you can see in the background. And when you look at the habitat from the guest path that you can see here, it makes the habitats look like they stretch off all the way to the mountains in the distance, which is going to look absolutely amazing. What we're building here is the basics of the ditch that is going to surround this habitat and cut across the middle of the habitat so that the Wisent and the GEFORCE's horses are separated, even though it looks like they are both in the same habitat. We need just over 2 meters in depth here so that the animals can't get out, and then we've got rocks laid across the top which are going to merge this in nicely with the rocks that we placed down at the start. None of the concrete that you can see here will be visible, it'll all be covered up with terrain, but this just enables us to get the terrain to the right depth and the right width all the way around the habitat. So we'll sink these down so just those rocks are visible. We'll be removing that metal fence later on, of course, and then we can use the terrain tools to dig out the ditches which are going to make this habitat work. We'll use the terrain stamp to get us down to the correct level so we can just see the concrete at the bottom of the piece that we just created, and then we'll use a mixture of the flatten to surface tool and the push tool to start getting the terrain down there all the way along this fence. This part of the habitat is sloping upwards, so we can't just use the flatten to surface tool all the way down. We need to continually be changing the depth of the terrain to make sure that we're maintaining that 2 meter depth there. And once we've revealed the concrete all the way down, we'll use the pull tool to just get the terrain just above the concrete so it can't be seen, so it's more attractive. And then we're going to use pretty much all the tools to get a nice slope going down there. We don't want a sudden drop off where the Wisent might fall down and hurt themselves, so we want it to slope nice and gently down to the lower level so that we end up with something that the guests can't really see and is safe for the Wisent and nice and natural looking. Once we've done bringing the terrain back up above the level of this concrete again, the only parts of that piece that we built that are going to be visible are the concrete walls on the sides and the rocks on the top. And then finally we can remove that temporary fence. This is what it looks like at the moment, much more attractive. We're going to build a much smaller custom fence just to make sure our guests don't actually go into the habitat. I thought for inspiration we would use a palisade. So as far as I'm aware, the palisade is the earliest wooden fence that humans used. That is what my research suggested. This came a lot later than 50,000 years ago, but I thought it would give that kind of early vibe still. It's basically just wooden stakes stuck into the ground. Not a very efficient way of building a fence, but that's progress for you. And using this African piece recolored, it does look really nice. This is one of my favorite wood pieces in the game. Its unique shape and the fact that you can just randomly rotate one piece as many times as you like and it always looks different means it's super useful. We're just going to copy this all the way along here, making sure that the height remains consistent above this terrain. So our little orange dudes here, our little angry vendors, will help us make sure that this stays at the same height. And I've got each wooden stake in the palisade a slightly different height to the others to give it that kind of slightly random look. And then we can extend the ditch around the rest of the habitat, raise the terrain at the back so that the ditch can't be seen by the guests. And this is all going to start to come together and give us the impression you start to see here where it looks like the habitat just goes on off into the distance, into infinity. Now, before we start to perfect these habitats, let's take a look at how autumn has come to the Alpine Mountain Zoo. So there's obviously no mechanism in the game to make autumn happen. The trees are just the trees and they always stay the same. When I was building this zoo, I looked at all the trees in the game to see which trees we had in the game in their autumn colors, or which trees we had that are naturally red and yellow. And then the trees that we've actually placed into the zoo, like these, have been selected because they can be replaced or modified with other trees to turn them into their autumn colours. The trickiest tree to work with is probably the mighty oak that you see here. But what we're going to do is basically cover it in this river bush willow tree. And we'll make sure the trunks of the bush willow tree are hidden in the branches of the oak, and then use the orange leaves of the bush willow to cover up the green leaves of the oak. It's going to take quite a few of them to cover this completely, but the other trees that we need to do are going to be much simpler. This is definitely the most work. Took a long time to get it to my satisfaction, but it is well worth it once we've placed it around the zoo. We'll just place the last of the bush willows here, and there we go. That is our autumnal oak tree. We're going to drop this into the zoo exactly on top of all the oak trees that we've used throughout the zoo, and then delete the original oaks, and that really starts to bring the autumnal flavour to this zoo. We've also got some little beech trees kicking about, and we can basically just use one river bush willow tree to turn that to its autumn colours. The reason I've been using these giant cedars throughout the zoo is if you sink them down into the ground, you can replace them pretty much exactly with the larch trees which have those yellowy orange leaves, and that does a really good job of bringing autumn into the zoo as well. You can see how good they look here, and these aren't the only new things in the zoo. We have baby raccoons as well, our first zoo babies. They are as adorable as you would expect. Now, we've got two of them here, a boy and a girl, and I thought it would be fun for you guys to name them. So let me know in the comments what you think we should name these little raccoons, and I'll pick my favourites and let you know what they are called in a future episode. Right, let's get back to the build. Now, the borrowed background effect that we want in this habitat is not going to work very well if we've got a giant staff building and a big old habitat gate in the eye line of the guests. So what we're going to do is use foliage and this pile of rocks to cover up where the habitat gate is and make sure that can't be seen from the guest paths. And that temporary staff building we built in episode 1 contains pretty much everything that we need to run the zoo. We don't need that anymore. I've got a new staff building starting up by the entrance. So all we need in this area is a staff room and a couple of keeper huts. We'll place those on the guest side of the habitat so that they don't spoil the view, and then we'll just run a path round from there to the keeper gate. We'll have another keeper gate for the horses later, and with all the infrastructure moved to the other side of the habitat, we take a look at it now. This is really starting to come together. I feel like there's something missing from the habitat though. It's time to fill it with grass. I want to keep most of the long grass in this habitat because it provides some nice movement, and then to that we're going to add a mixture of buffalo grass and in certain places the drin grass. I found when we built the red deer habitat and the forest at Belmont Zoo that these two go really nicely together. If you just have kind of clumps of the drin grass here and there, it just provides another kind of level of detail, makes everything sit together and look nice and natural. And we also need to put some of this grass on the far side of the habitat so that the habitat blends into the distance nicely. Once we've done that, we're going to use the off-show blueprint that we made just to provide a stable for the animals for if the weather gets really bad. This blueprint enables us to do that really quickly. It's a matter of a few seconds. We'll put a big animal door on there, and there we go. It's pretty much entirely hidden by those rocks, just sat in the background so that we know it's there. And now we can get on with adding some necessary items to the habitat, starting with this little water bowl. We initially made this for San Bernardino Zoo, and we've been using it ever since. It's just such a nice generic water trough. It actually works, and it's got that wooden surround, which means it fits in pretty much anywhere. I'm also putting a herb scent marker in just here. This is going to encourage the horses to come up to this little plateau, which means they'll be visible behind the Wisent when they're drinking from their water trough down here, which is going to look really good. And now it's time for a sign for the area. Although this is going to be a Paleolithic area, I wasn't sure that the word Paleolithic had enough sort of recognition for an area name. So I've decided to call it the Lost Wilds, which I think is pretty evocative and kind of sums up what it is anyway. This is a font from the workshop, a really nice one, and I'm just placing it on one rock. That's the entire sign, but it looks really nice. It just takes a lot of work to get this font to exactly fit the shape of this rock, so it's all visible. I get a lot of questions about the fonts that we use in these videos, so I thought I'd show you me using this one. You basically just have to keep rotating it so it exactly matches that rock, so that you can only see the parts of the letters that should be visible. And it is well worth the time spent doing this, because once it's all done and it's just sat into that rock there, it looks so nice. And even though it's essentially just two pieces, it really does announce the area well. And if you're enjoying this video as much as I'm enjoying this font, then please remember to hit the like button. It really helps to increase the visibility of the channel. This entrance sign is very close to being finished now. So once we've got everything lined up onto the last letter here, we'll just recolor it so it's a bit more visible. And I really like that final effect there. We're almost done with the beginnings of this area. We just need to add some foliage and some more rocks just to make this path that runs all the way down here look nicer. These two animals are not all the animals that we're going to have in this area, of course. There were some amazing carnivores living in Europe about 50,000 years ago. Ever since I learned about this when I was a kid, it's absolutely fascinated me that we had lions and hyenas and animals like that just wandering around in Europe. And we will be adding some serious carnivores into this area in a future episode. And speaking of future episodes, unless I've got lost, then I should be somewhere around Machu Picchu as you watch this, which is very exciting. I have been building like an absolute demon for the past few weeks to get these episodes ready before I left for Peru, but it turned out 4 was my limit in the time I had available to me. So this will be taking a 1-week break next week. However, I do still have a video for you, something which I hope you will find very useful that I've been working on in the background for the past couple of months. So there'll still be a video next Saturday, but the Alpine Mountain Zoo will return 2 weeks from today with something very exciting. The last thing we're going to do today, before we look at our finished habitats, is update our signs. I realised that I built the original version of these directional signs for one of the tour episodes of San Bernardino Zoo, so I've never actually showed you how they work. So I thought I'd show you that. Basically, you take one of the normal directional signs in the game, and then we just use art shapes, a mixture of the 2D full stops from the Boogaloo font and the Noto font, and we use those to completely cover this sign. If you get them in exactly the right place, then they will obscure the sign, but still allow the text that you write on the sign to shine through. So you can just type whatever you like on the signs to direct people to your areas. Pick a font that you're happy with, and this sign is double-sided, so again, if you've got the art shapes in the right place, that will show on both sides of the sign without you having to do any extra work. And now that we've got an extra sign in place here, just below the Amur Forest, we can double-click on this, and that will select the sign underneath, and we can just put in a name for the new area. I was still choosing a name when I created this part of it, so it says Wildlands for the moment, but that will be updated to the Lost Wilds later on. And now we can sort out the colour. If we use the colour selector tool, you hit the I key to go into multi-select mode, and then you hold down Alt. That enables you to select all of the art shapes at once, and then you can pick a different colour for each land in your zoo to help the guests navigate. I'm thinking a natural looking yellowy brown will fit in nicely with the prehistoric feel of this area. So we'll go with that. We have to select the Noto and the Boogaloo items separately, because this multi-select tool just selects all the pieces of the same colour and the same type. So we just need to do that to both of those. And there we go, we got a new sign into the zoo. And that is the first part of the Lost Wilds completed. Let's check it out. Now that is a very pleasing view. I think it really evokes the feeling of ancient Europe, and this shot here is one of my favourite shots I've ever taken in this game, I think. We've got our wild horses in, and they very helpfully decided to stand all together around this tree without me having to move them, which was very useful. We will be breeding these and the Wisent in order to increase the size of our herds. And I thought for a change today we'd actually take a walk into the habitat so you can see exactly what it looks like from the guest perspective. The beginnings of this path haven't been finished yet, of course, but from here you can get an idea of what this is going to look like when the area is complete. So a really good view of the Wisent, the path stretching off up the hill there, and you can just make out one of the Javolski's horses stood on that little rise where we put the enrichment item to encourage them up there, so that's cool. And if we take a look from the other end, this is the top of the path looking down through the horse habitat along to the Wisent habitat. I would love to get your thoughts on this new area. Like I said at the start of the video, this just came to me as I was looking at the temporary recent habitat. Let me know what other ancient European animals you'd like to see in here or their modern equivalents. Let's take a look at where we started today. You can just make out the original recent habitat here, and this is where we are now. Looking forward to adding some more animals into this area. Thank you so much for watching as always. Thank you especially to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club, and I'll see you again next week for some more Planet Zoo.